I didn't recognize her at first. There was this woman, front row, fourth seat from the left, wiping her eyes just minutes into my speech. I thought maybe she was moved by the story I'd told about rebuilding legacy systems in underfunded schools. Or maybe she had allergies. Or maybe my tie was that bad. But then she tilted her head and blinked, and I saw it. Sylvia. Not the Sylvia I remembered. This one looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. The woman who used to walk like every floor was a runway now sank into her chair like it might swallow her whole. And I just kept speaking, kept gesturing, kept moving through the slides like my chest wasn't splitting open. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she vanished from my life like a software update gone wrong. No warning, no confirmation screen. Just poof. Gone. And now here she was, with a conference badge clipped to her blazer and mascara quietly surrendering down her cheek. I didn't plan on attending this event, let alone speaking at it. Westbridge Systems had asked me last minute. Some other guy bailed. I almost said no. I hate flying. I hate hotel pillows. I hate standing in front of people who think IT infrastructure is boring before you've even opened your mouth. But I went. Because something told me to. And there she was. In the audience. Watching me explain how I build a life from scratch after being laid off, betrayed, discarded. I didn't mention her, of course. That wasn't the point of the presentation. But maybe it was the point of me. She hadn't moved when the room applauded. Just sat there, eyes wide, jaw clenched. Like she couldn't breathe. Like I was the ghost and she was the one being haunted. Funny how tables turn. Later, during the break, I went to the lounge for coffee. I thought she might approach me. She didn't. Just hovered by the tall glass doors, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. I could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing against the space between us like invisible glass. And all I could think about, like an idiot, was how she used to steal my hoodies and never give them back. How her laugh used to echo off our apartment walls like it was trying to reach the future. How I once believed that no matter what she chose in life, she'd always choose us. But she didn't. She chose her career. And now she was standing 20 feet away from me, holding a paper cup with trembling hands. Like she'd realized something too late. The next time I saw her, she wasn't crying. She was standing near the espresso machine, surrounded by people. And yet, utterly alone. Her badge read Sylvia K. Vance, VP Strategy, Kinro Global. Of course. She'd made it. The job she chased, the ladder she climbed, everything she sacrificed me for, it all paid off. VP. Fancy logo. Crisp blazer. But I could see it in her eyes, even from across the room. Something was cracked behind the polish. And that was new. I wasn't supposed to walk past her. I had planned to avoid her entirely. But my legs moved before my thoughts did, like some part of me wanted to see what would happen. I didn't stop, didn't say a word. Just passed by close enough that she could smell the same cologne I always wore. She froze. I didn't look back. But I heard her whisper, soft, almost like a reflex, Howard. It didn't hit me until I stepped into the hallway. She didn't know I was the speaker. She had no idea. I wasn't on the official promo. I was the late fill-in. Her shock during my keynote wasn't just emotional, it was raw disbelief. She hadn't prepared to face me. Not here. Not like that. And that gave me the tiniest sliver of power for the first time in 5 years. Now, I don't want to sound bitter. Okay, maybe I do. But only because I spent so long being the guy people forgot in the background. The one holding her coat during award ceremonies. The one who'd cancel plans with friends just to troubleshoot her pitch decks. I was never angry at her ambition. I admired it. Loved it, even. But what I didn't love was being treated like a detour on her road to success. And when she left, she didn't just walk away from a relationship, she vacuumed me out of her world like I'd never existed. Back in the conference hall, I sat through 2 more panels with my arms crossed, mind racing. I should have left. Should have checked out, hopped an early flight home, pretended none of this ever happened. But instead, I stayed. Something in me needed to see how far the cracks went. That evening, they held a networking dinner. The kind where everyone drinks just enough to stop pretending they're better than you, but not enough to say what they really mean. I kept to the edges, nursing a flat soda, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. And then I felt a tap on my shoulder. I didn't turn right away. Maybe I was scared of what she'd say. Maybe I didn't trust my face not to crumble the second I saw hers again. But then she spoke, voice quiet and cautious, like she was approaching a wounded animal. Can we talk? I finally turned, and there she was, Sylvia, 5 years older, 5 years colder, but suddenly looking smaller than I remembered. She was gripping her wine glass like it was a lifeline. Her confidence had a tremor. Her posture didn't match her job title. I nodded, said nothing. She took that as a yes. We stepped outside onto a narrow terrace overlooking downtown. The city glowed below us, indifferent and endless. She took a breath like she was about to launch into some prepared script, but then, nothing. Just silence. The kind that weighed more than words. And then, finally, she broke. "I didn't know you'd be here," she whispered, voice shaking. "I wouldn't have come if I had." That's when I realized. She wasn't there for work. Not really. She was running. From what? I didn't know yet. But she wasn't chasing a goal anymore. She was hiding behind one. I looked her in the eye, finally letting the weight of everything she'd done settle between us. "Yeah," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "That's funny. Because I spent years hoping you'd come back." Her lips parted slightly, as if the air had turned to ice. And that's when the first tear slipped down her cheek. The silence that followed was brutal. Not the kind that lets you collect your thoughts. The kind that pushes them out of you whether you're ready or not. She turned away from me, facing the city lights like they held answers she wasn't brave enough to ask. And I stood there, feeling this strange pressure in my chest, like something was trying to escape, years of buried frustration, of confusion, of guilt that never should have been mine in the first place. "I didn't come here to see you," she said finally, her voice low. "But the moment I did, I knew I owed you more than I gave." I laughed. Quietly. It wasn't a bitter laugh, more like disbelief coated in exhaustion. "Owed me? Sylvia, you left me with an empty apartment and 2 lines of text and a goodbye email." "I couldn't face you, Howard," she murmured. "I didn't know how." "That's convenient," I replied. "Because I didn't know how to live without you. But I had to figure it out anyway." Her shoulders sank. She still hadn't looked at me. The woman who used to charge into rooms with a perfect smile and a 10-point plan now stood still, shivering slightly despite the mild breeze. I could tell something had cracked long before this night. And maybe it had nothing to do with me. Or maybe it had everything. She turned toward me slowly, eyes shining, not in some romantic, movie way. No, this was something else. Like a dam about to break. I remember those eyes. They used to flash when she was passionate. Focused. Alive. Now they were just tired. "I thought if I just succeeded enough, the guilt would go away," she said. "I told myself it wasn't personal. That I needed to grow. That you'd find someone better." And for a while, I believed it. I took a step back. Not to be dramatic, but to breathe. Because her words weren't just painful, they were worse. They sounded rehearsed. Like she had been preparing them for years but hadn't decided who deserved to hear them until now. "I was never trying to compete with your success," I said. "I just wanted to be part of your life. Not a speed bump on the way to your next promotion." She closed her eyes. "You were never a bump. You were..." "What?" I pushed. "A chapter? A phase? The guy you outgrew." She didn't answer. And that told me enough. Suddenly, a burst of laughter came from inside. Someone clinked a glass. The conference buzzed on, completely unaware that a 5-year storm had just reopened on the terrace. Sylvia looked at the door, then back at me, like she was about to run again. "You always had this way," she said quietly, "of making me feel safe. Even now. And I hate that." I blinked. "Why?" "Because I don't deserve it," she said. "And I know that now. I knew it the night I walked away. But I was too far gone. Too deep in a life I'd already chosen. The truth was, I built her up in my head for years after she left. Imagine she was out there thriving, fulfilled, sipping champagne with colleagues who understood her better than I ever could. And maybe some of that was true. But here she was, standing in front of me shaken, regretful, and completely unsure of herself. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't satisfying. It was sad. And yet, a small part of me, an embarrassingly human part, still wanted her to say, "I made a mistake. Come back." That same part that had kept her side of the closet empty for months. That part that waited for her birthday every year just in case she called. That part that hated me for still feeling anything at all. "I didn't think you'd ever forgive me," she whispered. I stared at her. Really looked. And finally said, "I didn't." That was the moment her face changed. Her eyes flickered, not with shock, but with understanding. For the first time, she realized this wasn't going to end the way she hoped. I wasn't here to rescue her from whatever quiet regret she was drowning in. I wasn't the same man she left behind. And no amount of tears would rewind 5 years of silence. "I'm glad you came," I added, not out of kindness, but because I needed to say it. Not for me. For you. Because now you'll finally have to carry the truth you tried to outrun. She opened her mouth like she had one last thing to say, but nothing came out. And for once, I didn't fill the silence for her. She stayed on that terrace for a while, standing there as if paralyzed, while I walked away without another word. I didn't storm off, didn't slam the door behind me. I simply left her there to feel what I had been living with for years. A hallway stretched in front of me, filled with people laughing, networking, making connections I no longer craved. I needed air. Not the kind in conference halls or glass hotels, the kind that didn't carry her perfume. I stepped outside through a side exit, pulled out my badge to avoid the security guy's glance, and just kept walking until I reached the parking garage. I didn't have a car here. I just stood there in level 2, leaning against the cold concrete wall between a Range Rover and a Tesla, staring at nothing. And all I could think was, how is it that I had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was real, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Maybe because part of me had rehearsed a speech. Some kind of big, "You broke me, but I rebuilt myself" finale. But the moment I saw her eyes well up with tears, the words just dissolved. There was no script for that kind of ache. Just reality and the sad weight of years we could never get back. I stayed there for what felt like hours. Long enough for my phone to buzz with messages from colleagues and event organizers. "Great job. You really owned the room. Are you coming to the after party?" I ignored them all. I wasn't in the mood to celebrate anything. Then, just as I started to walk back, I heard heels echo across the garage. I didn't need to turn around. I knew it was her. "I thought you'd be gone by now," I said without looking back. "I was," she replied. But I couldn't leave it like that. I exhaled slowly, then faced her. She looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like she'd spent the last few hours trying to rewrite history in her head, but it kept ending the same way. She stepped closer but didn't invade my space. There was a caution in her now, a hesitance that I'd never seen before. It was as if she was finally aware that I could hurt her, not by being cruel, but by simply not caring anymore. "I know I can't undo what I did," she started, "but I want you to understand why I left." I stayed quiet. Not to be dramatic, but because I honestly didn't trust myself to speak. I didn't know if I wanted to hear her reasons. I didn't know if it would matter. I was terrified, she continued, of failing, of becoming one of those people who said no to everything they dreamed about for the sake of comfort. And we were good, Howard. Too good. You made me feel so safe, so grounded, that I started to lose the part of me that chased things. And instead of talking to you, instead of asking for time or space or anything, I panicked. I thought if I didn't cut ties completely, I'd never be able to leave. I shook my head. "You didn't just leave. You erased me." She flinched. "And now what?" I asked. "You come to my conference, see me standing on a stage, and suddenly you feel guilty? Regretful? Nostalgic? Sylvia, I spent nights staring at our empty bed, convincing myself you must have had a reason. That maybe one day you'd show up with a real explanation. And now I get this." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know you were doing this well." That sentence hit me like a slap. Because buried underneath it was something ugly. She didn't just regret leaving. She regretted that I survived without her. That I found a version of success that didn't include her at all. I stepped back, feeling a quiet surge of clarity. "You wanted to be the one who outgrew me," I said. "You needed to believe that leaving was part of some grand evolution. But it wasn't. It was fear, dressed up as ambition." She didn't deny it. She didn't say anything at all. And for the first time, I saw her truly speechless. We stood there in that half-lit garage, two people who used to share everything, now reduced to fragments. I wanted to walk away again. I should have. But instead, I asked her a question I didn't expect to ask. "Are you happy?" She hesitated. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. She looked at the concrete, then at me, and then she shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Not even close." That silence came again, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt final, like a door closing for good. And I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just free. We didn't say goodbye. She didn't cry again, at least not in front of me. She just stood there as I walked away, her arms limp at her sides like she didn't know what to do with them anymore. I didn't look back. If I had, I might have faltered. I might have said something stupid like, "Take care," or "I hope you find peace." But I wasn't ready to gift her comfort. Not when she'd spent years building her life on top of the wreckage she left me in. I walked all the way to my hotel room without seeing anyone. Maybe I passed faces I knew. Doesn't matter. They blurred together like background noise. My head was full of her voice, her words, The ones I'd wanted to hear back then, but now felt like poison disguised as closure. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and just stood there. The room was sterile and silent. Beige walls, impersonal furniture, a neatly made bed I wouldn't sleep in. I sat down on the edge of the mattress and stared at the carpet. I kept waiting for something in me to snap into place, some final moment of emotional resolution. But there was none. Just this deep, dragging realization that I had waited too long for an apology that did nothing for me now. I had carried that wound like it was sacred, something private, buried, protected. And tonight she'd torn it open not to heal it, but to ease her own guilt. The truth is, Sylvia didn't need to break my heart to chase her dreams. She could have talked to me. We could have figured it out. She could have said, I need space, or I'm scared of losing myself. But instead, she ghosted her way out of a life we built together, left me pacing our empty apartment for weeks wondering what I'd done wrong. And now, 5 years later, she wanted me to help her sort through the emotional mess she created? No. I took a hot shower, letting the steam try its best to unclench my jaw. I stared at myself in the mirror afterward, still half wrapped in a towel, and barely recognized the man in the reflection. I looked older, sure, but also sharper. Harder. Like a guy who'd been through something and came out the other side without asking anyone's permission. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't need closure from her. Maybe I needed to forgive myself for waiting. The next morning, I showed up for the final keynote panel early. I hadn't planned to stay the whole day, but after the night I had, leaving early would have felt like running. And I wasn't running anymore. The seats filled up quickly. Some familiar faces from tech startups, a few execs from bigger firms. I recognized a few nods from people who'd seen my talk the day before. But then, just as the lights dimmed, she entered the room again. Sylvia. This time, she didn't sit in the front. She hovered near the back row, unsure, then slipped into an empty seat in the shadows. And when our eyes met, even across that crowd, she didn't smile. She just gave the smallest nod, a silent gesture that didn't ask for anything in return. After the panel ended, people swarmed. Questions, compliments, handshakes. I went through the motions. I knew she was still watching, but I didn't seek her out. Instead, I left through the side exit once again, this time into the morning light. Not because I wanted to avoid her, but because I didn't owe her another second. And then, just when I thought it was over, a staff member came rushing up behind me in the hallway. He was holding a sealed white envelope. Someone asked me to give this to you, he said. Didn't say who. I didn't need to open it to know. I felt the weight of it before I even slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting. Neat. Familiar. If I could go back to the moment I left, I would have stayed. But I know I don't deserve to say that to your face. You were never my mistake. You were the thing I was too afraid to hold on to. There was no request for forgiveness. No phone number. No invitation to talk. Just those words, and her name. And for once, it felt like she understood that the silence she left me with had grown louder than anything she could ever say. I folded the note slowly, put it in my jacket pocket. Not because I needed to keep it, but because I wanted to remember the moment I stopped needing her. I carried that letter around for the rest of the day, not because it brought me peace, but because it was physical proof that I had been real, that we were real. So much of our story had become digital, vanished texts, old photos erased, voicemails deleted in moments of weakness. But this letter, this was something she couldn't recall and rewrite. It wasn't sent with a read receipt or buried under meetings and time zones. It was her own words, on paper, handed to me with no defense. I went back to my room, laid the letter on the desk, and just stared at it. I kept wondering what she thought it would accomplish. Did she think it would fix something? Was it a confession or a farewell? Or maybe it was her way of finally acknowledging the thing she'd spent 5 years pretending didn't matter. I was her unfinished sentence. The comma she turned into a period without asking if I was done speaking. But here's the thing. I hadn't told her everything either. Because while she had been climbing her corporate ladder and convincing herself she'd made the right choice, I'd found something. Something she left behind, not in a drawer or on a shelf, but in our shared digital storage. I hadn't looked at that folder in years. I thought I'd deleted it, actually. But one night, maybe 2 years after she left, I had too much whiskey and too little restraint, and I searched her name in my cloud archive. That's when I found the voice memo. It was dated 2 weeks before she sent the breakup email. I remember sitting there in the dark, headphones in, listening to her voice crack as she recorded something she never sent. Maybe she was practicing. Maybe it was just therapy she kept to herself. But in that recording, she admitted the one thing that haunted me for years, that she had started seeing someone else before she left. Someone from work. Someone safe and more aligned with her goals. She said, "Howard will never forgive me if I tell him. So maybe it's better to just disappear. He deserves better than this." But I don't know how to walk away with honesty. Not anymore. I listened to it 3 times that night. Then I archived it. Never told anyone. Not even my closest friend. Because what would I say? That the woman I loved didn't just leave me, she replaced me before I even knew I was being replaced? That she was afraid of telling me the truth, so she opted for silence, hoping time would cover the bloodstains? I didn't tell her I knew. Even on that terrace. Even when she stood in front of me trying to cry her way into absolution, I held that truth close. Because I realized something important. She didn't deserve to have her shame cleansed by my reaction. She didn't earn that vulnerability from me anymore. Not after everything. And so now, sitting at the airport bar, waiting for my flight home, I took out that letter and looked at it one last time. It was neat. Controlled. Like her. Not a single word out of place. But the truth she left out screamed louder than the words she chose. I folded it again, slower this time. Not with care, but with closure. Then I walked over to the bar counter, ordered a coffee instead of a drink. I wanted my mind clear, and tucked the note under my coaster. A symbol, maybe, of the version of me that once needed her approval. That guy didn't board the plane. Before I left the bar, I looked around one last time. And there she was. Sylvia. At the far end of the terminal. Alone. She hadn't seen me. She was typing something into her phone, maybe another apology that would never reach me, or a reflection she'd send to someone else. But I didn't move. I just watched her for a second. She looked smaller now. Like her world had finally shrunk to match the truth she tried to outrun. I turned away before she saw me. Not out of fear, but because that was the moment I realized. The most powerful thing I ever did was survive her without needing to be seen. My flight wasn't for another hour, but I boarded early anyway. I just wanted to sit down, plug in my headphones, and let the drone of the engines drown everything out. I chose a window seat near the wing. Something about seeing the machinery working in harmony felt grounding. For a guy who spent most of his life trying to keep things from falling apart, watching something hold together was oddly therapeutic. As the plane filled with passengers, I kept expecting to see her walk down the aisle. Some pathetic part of me half prepared for it. Maybe she'd booked the same flight. Maybe fate wasn't done twisting the knife. But she didn't come. The seat beside me stayed empty until a teenage girl sat down, AirPods already in, completely uninterested in the broken man beside her. And that was perfect. When we took off, I stared out the window and realized something strange. For the first time since Sylvia left me all those years ago, I wasn't wondering what if. I wasn't cycling through every word I said or didn't say. I wasn't picturing a different version of us where I was just ambitious enough, just assertive enough, just enough. That question, the one that haunted me in the quietest hours, was I not enough for her? It had finally dissolved into something more honest. I was too much of the right thing for someone who didn't want it. And that wasn't a failure. It was survival. I landed back in Portland late. It was raining, of course. The kind of light rain that always seems to catch you off guard. I grabbed a rideshare and sat quietly in the back, watching wet neon blur past the window. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, or maybe just emptier now that I wasn't dragging Sylvia's ghost in behind me. On my desk sat a photo I'd forgotten to put away, me and Sylvia at the lake, years ago. Her sunglasses were crooked, and my arm was around her like she was the only thing tethering me to the planet. I picked it up, looked at it, then set it face down in the drawer. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't want to see it anymore either. That night, I slept like I hadn't in years. Not dreamless, but steady. The kind of sleep where your body doesn't jolt awake looking for someone who's no longer there. And when I woke up, the air felt lighter. My place still smelled like old coffee and rain-dampened curtains, but for the first time, it didn't smell like absence. 2 days later, I received an email. The subject line was blank. The sender was Sylvia. My chest didn't tighten. My hands didn't shake. I just clicked it. Howard. I know the letter wasn't enough. I know nothing is. I lied to myself about a lot of things, but the worst one was thinking I could leave without consequences. You didn't just support me. You believed in me when I barely believed in myself. And I treated that like a weakness instead of the strength it was. I didn't deserve you then. I don't now. I'm not asking for a reply. I just needed to say one last thing, this time with honesty. I loved you. I still do. S. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. I didn't feel the urge to respond. Not out of cruelty, just clarity. She had finally said the words I waited years to hear. And they arrived too late to change anything. And that's what no one tells you about heartbreak. Sometimes it doesn't end with a grand confrontation or perfect forgiveness. Sometimes it just runs out of road. That evening, I went for a walk. It was still drizzling, and I didn't bring an umbrella. I passed a bookstore where they were hosting a poetry reading. I didn't go in, but I smiled at the sight of people gathered in something soft and quiet. I walked by a bar where I used to drink alone. This time, I kept walking. By the time I returned home, my shoes were soaked. I made dinner without checking my phone. I read a chapter of an old sci-fi novel I never finished. And before bed, I deleted her email. Not with malice. Just necessity. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't have to be a conversation. Sometimes it's just the decision not to carry someone else's weight anymore. Weeks passed, then a month, and I never replied to Sylvia's email. I never needed to. Not because I wanted to hurt her or prove something, but because there wasn't anything left to say. I had already said goodbye the moment I stopped looking for her name in a crowd. The moment I stopped writing her into the endings of things she no longer belonged to. What I didn't expect was how much lighter life would feel without the invisible task of carrying her memory. I had spent years stitching myself around a hollow space, trying to be better, stronger, more successful, as if one day she'd reappear and I'd finally be enough. But it was never about being enough for her. It was about being enough for me. One Saturday morning, I walked to the neighborhood cafe. Same place I used to avoid because it reminded me of when we'd go there on lazy weekends. But this time, it felt different. Familiar, not painful. The barista remembered my name. The music was soft and slow, not intrusive. I took my coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass by, without wondering where she was. A woman sat down at the next table, brown hair in a messy knot, glasses too big for her face, buried in a paperback that looked older than either of us. She looked up, caught me staring, and gave a small, unassuming smile. I smiled back. Not flirtatious. Not urgent. Just human. She nodded at my book. That one's better than the movie. I laughed. I hope so. The movie was awful. We started talking. Her name was Camille. She worked in nonprofit operations. Liked rainy mornings and disliked small talk, but oddly enjoyed awkward silences. She spoke like someone who didn't need to impress anyone. I found myself leaning in without even noticing. We talked for almost an hour. No pressure. No expectations. Just shared space between two people who weren't in a rush to fill it. And when she got up to leave, she paused and said, "Maybe I'll see you here again." Maybe, I replied, without hesitation. That night, as I got ready for bed, I glanced at my drawer. The one where I used to keep every photo, every letter, every memento of Sylvia's shadow. I opened it, looked inside. Empty. Because weeks ago, without ceremony, I had thrown it all away. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need reminders of who I used to be to prove who I'd become. I lay down, pulled the blanket up, and listened to the sound of the rain. It no longer reminded me of her. It just sounded like rain. For the first time in 5 years, it didn't fall through me. It fell around me. And I slept, not because I was tired of the past, but because I was finally rested in the present. Maybe that's the real ending. Not a dramatic reunion or a cinematic revenge. Just peace. Just breath. Just the quiet beauty of moving on. And this time, when I dreamed, I didn't dream of her. I dreamed of myself. And I woke up smiling.